We started out by talking about what political parties do, so we at least understand that political parties are just a group of people working to win elections, right? Like all their goals are about winning the next election and what can they do to attract votes and to win elections and to compete. So now we're going to take a look at political party systems. So we're going to see how that works in a two-party system and how things might be different if there were more or fewer parties. So we'll talk today about political party systems, and then we'll talk about the party organization that runs the party from day to day nationwide. Get excited. It's time for your objective. We've only got a few of these left, so let's enjoy our time together with our learning objectives. Today, we are going to describe political party organizations. We're going to describe the structure of political party systems. We're going to describe the organizations, and that way we'll be able to better explain how parties link the people to the government. So the question we're going to be answering today is, how do people organize around elections? First up today, we're going to focus on what things are like in a two-party system. So a political party system like we use here in the United States, where there are really only two parties with a chance of winning. Here we've got President Trump and President Obama, a Republican and a Democrat, just probably giggling together. Trump is showing you the very, very tiny chances that any other party could compete with the Democrats or Republicans. So let's take a look at what makes the United States a two-party system. So the two-party system, it really just means that there are two major parties that dominate the government. That is definitely true here in the United States. We've got two parties that control all of the different aspects of the government here. Nearly all of the elected officials inside a two-party system would be a representative of one of these two parties. We may have other parties that are out there, also true in the United States, but these parties and their candidates are unlikely to win any elections. So when we deal with a two-party system, we're going to be dealing with a majority party and a minority party. The party that has the most control is what we call the majority party. The other party is the minority party, and they have different incentives for what they should be doing. In the United States, we've always pretty much had a two-party system. The parties may change, but there's really only two that are competing realistically in the government here. So we'll end up going through the different parties later this week, but this has really always been a two-party system here. When we do have changes in which parties those are, it is always because a minor party comes along and gets rid of an existing major party. So one of the small third parties, one of the startup parties or something like that, they come along and they replace one of the existing major parties. In the United States, we've never had a third party win a presidential election. We've had several people run as third party candidates, and several people even get electoral votes, but nobody ever win a presidential election, and no third party has ever gotten a majority of seats in the House or the Senate. We do have some members of third parties elected to the House or Senate, but usually just like one or two, definitely not enough to have any voting control. So the main thing we're going to focus on is we need to talk about why there are only two parties here in the United States. And so we'll talk about some of these reasons and look at the structures that make it so that there's only two parties here. To start with, there's basically always only been two parties in the United States. That really started with the debate over the ratification of the Constitution. That was an issue where there were two choices, either say yes to the Constitution or say no to the Constitution. So we started off from a two-party system, and people are really used to that. People don't really accept the idea of a third party. This really also fits the ideologies in the United States. So the two parties really kind of work along these two big ideological lines. Obviously, people have different beliefs about policies and things like that, but it really works out for the United States that there is one party that's mostly liberal and one party that's mostly conservative. The other thing here is that for parties to be able to win, especially in a country like the United States that has, more than 100 million voters, parties have to appeal to huge numbers of people. So in order to do that, they're going to have platforms and ideas that appeal to huge numbers of people, and so that's gonna be what's necessary to attract big groups of people to support them. So these are some of the reasons why we kind of start from a position where there's only two parties. The way we elect the president in the United States is one of the ways that kind of ensures that we're stuck with only two parties. So the Electoral College really turns the presidential election into 50 very small state elections, right? Each state is having its own election for the president. Only somebody who comes from a party that has the ability to organize in all 50 states is going to be able to win the presidential election. So a person from a third party that is only popular in one region or something like that is not going to be able to compete for the presidential election. Small parties have a really hard time getting started because it's hard to build your organization in these 50 different places at the same time. So that's why the Electoral College makes it very difficult for third parties to start to get the momentum to be competitive in the election. Then the other thing here is voters are used to this. Voters have seen third party candidates and their impact on presidential elections. And so they tend to look at voting for a third party as helping the party that you agree with the least. So Democrat voters who are liberal are unlikely to vote for a third party on the far left because that's going to help the Republican in the election. And so this is how voters feel about things because of the way the Electoral College works. So it makes it even harder for us to ever get beyond the two-party system. The way we do elections in Congress has the same effect. So the Senate, of course, those are statewide elections, so same issue that we see in presidential elections. But the way we do the House of Representatives, we use a system called single-member districts. So the whole country is divided up into 435 districts, and we just pick one person to represent it. If we used a different system, we might let Tennessee choose 9 people to go to Congress, and a few would be Republican, a smaller amount would be Democrats, but there might be room for third parties. But since we have 435 districts, each picking one person, members of the major parties are the ones that are likely to win these offices. So small parties that are just getting started, they may have a little bit of support everywhere, but they're probably not going to have the most support in any of the districts. The other way we run elections here in the United States, we call these plurality elections, and that means that the person with the most votes wins. So a person does not have to have 51% in order to win. This is true for both electoral votes and for Congress. But there's no benefit in the election to anybody other than first place. So if there were 3 parties and one of the candidates was able to get 35% of the vote, but the other candidates each got 30% of the vote, then there's still, even though you see there's big division among voters, we're going to have a member of one of those parties get the seat or get all the electoral votes. So plurality elections almost always end up hurting third parties and leading to a two-party system. There are actually a lot of good sides to the two-party system. You may or may not feel this way, but there are a lot of good aspects to a two-party system. The main one would be that it really promotes centrism. It promotes the idea that both parties need to appeal to the middle in order to be able to have an advantage in the elections. And so that means that we really don't have parties that are on the extreme far right and on the extreme far left. If they want to be competitive in winning elections, they need to appeal somewhere in the middle. This makes our system really stable. I know that whatever happens in the future here, I am expecting either a Democrat or a Republican to win the presidency in 2024 and also in 2028 and also in 2032. Nowhere in the future do I expect to see a communist win or a libertarian win or anybody from any different party. So it's a really stable and predictable form of government. It's also pretty simple because we only have to compromise with one group. So when the Republicans are in power, if they want to pass stuff, they only have to work with Democrats. They don't have to worry about working with 4 or 5 different groups. The other thing here as a voter, it's pretty simple. I only have to learn about two candidates, right? I have to learn about the Democrat and the Republican and make my decision, but I don't have to go out there and learn about 6 or 7 different options that are running for president, because really only these two have a chance to win. There's also significant disadvantages to the two-party system. So, the biggest of these is that they limit other viewpoints. Like, we don't hear a lot of ideas. We have the Republicans and the Democrats both trying to convince voters in the middle that they'd be the best party to be in charge. So we don't really hear a lot of diverse policy ideas out there. We have a pretty limited options from the parties that we're talking about. This also makes voters apathetic. Voters get sick of the two parties and the candidates that they put forward. So voters end up choosing the candidate that they can deal with, but not necessarily one that they're very excited about. And this also, what has happened is that this sometimes leads to less compromise, even though compromise is technically easy to achieve. These parties are becoming, the two parties we have are becoming a little more polarized, and they're less likely to compromise because we don't have a lot of interest from the moderate voters. They only have, like, the voters in the middle, they have two options that aren't really speaking to them, and so they don't have a lot of participation there that leads the parties to work together. All right, so here's the sad news. We are stuck. Because of the Constitution, we are stuck with the two-party system here. Think about the reasons we said it exists. The way we do elections for Congress causes a two-party system. The way we use the Electoral College causes the two-party system. Both of those things are in the Constitution, so it would take amendments to change them. Amendments have to start with Congress, so we need 2/3 of Congress to agree on how to change these systems to allow for more party competition. But the problem is that 100% of Congress is Democrats or Republicans. So even though they may not agree on much, they may not agree on policies or anything like that, they can agree that they like the current system because it gives their party advantages. So the Democrats and Republicans at least agree with each other that they don't want to compete with new groups in the upcoming election. So this is, because it's so hard to amend the Constitution, and because we would need Democrats and Republicans to propose changes that would increase their competition, we're probably stuck with the two-party system. All right, so the two-party system is one way of doing things, and is definitely the way we do things here in the United States, but it's not the only way of doing things. So we're going to take a look at some different party systems and see what would be different and what could be preferable or worse off than the party system we use here in the United States.